This is really exciting for me because when Sean, he sent an email out to the team and asked if we knew of someone who would be a great speaker for April, which is Black Women History Month. I immediately thought of Sharonda, and it is definitely my honor to introduce her. I've known her for about 15 to 20 years because we served at the same church together. And she is one of those people who will blend into the crowd, and she's all about serving and serving others. But it's when you speak with her, she commands the audience, and there is something special about her. Sharonda, she is the Senior Vice President of Stores at Ralph Lauren and the co-chair for diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion. She is the co-host of a new podcast, Inspire, Wonder. And this podcast is targeted to be released in May of this year. And it is designed to amplify the voices of powerful, inspiring women and to spread their stories. Last year, and this is something that I'm so excited about, she did a pilot program that focused on children's literacy, financial literacy, and she's currently working on expanding that pilot to a larger population based on the need in underserved communities. She's also a real estate investor and is growing wealth in that way. And just, she's amazing. She is amazing. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Sharonda Weatherspoon.
Hello, everyone. I'm very, very excited to be here with each and every one of you. I'm hoping that you have a lot of questions for me. I've been, I guess, just a little bit more about myself. I've been in retail now for, I guess it's a little over 30 years. Because I'm coming up on a milestone birthday at the end of this month. So it's been about 30 years that I've actually had the great pleasure of being in retail. I didn't start off in retail, but I will tell you, I'm very excited that, I was actually able to use a lot of my skills. My major in school is chemistry. And, a lot of times people think that it's so far from what I'm doing now, but there were so many different things that I learned, by being a chemistry major. And one of them was really problem solving and, really being able to think out of the box. And those skills I actually take with me in everything that I'm doing, now. But I think before we talk about, some of the things that I've actually done as an adult, I think it's important that and some of the things that I've done professionally, I always usually like to start with, just who I am as a person, because what I do is what I do, and there's definitely some overlap there. But I think it's important that you just understand who I am as a person. And I'm just going to show you one thing, like really, really quickly, that I usually like to share, because I think this helps people to get a better understanding of just really what I would consider my journey, and also what I would consider, the different faces that I have, at different phases in my life, just overall. So I'm just going to share something really quickly and then just talk through it just for a few moments. So when you see this just overall, so this little girl on the right, on your far left, this was probably taken when I was in kindergarten. And I will tell you, there's some things about her that I think about every single time when I think about my journey. There's a few things that I think about. I always wanted to win. I always wanted to be first. I always wanted to be the person that was leading. I always wanted to be in charge. From a young age, I was in charge of my brothers, so much so my mother would always say to me, "You are not their mother. You cannot tell them what to do, and they shouldn't be listening to you." So there were just some things that were just innate, that was, the person that I was. Then fast forward, this person in the middle, I call this kind of like Sharonda 2.0, because this is Sharonda. I'm confident, I'm learning some things. I'm newer to leadership, but I'm still literally finding my way, but I'm learning along the way, having a great time learning, but also making some significant mistakes, and taking some risks, some of which worked out and some of which did not. And I'll talk about that as well. But I'm also in this place of not, regretting any of the risks that I took that did not work out, because this is all a part of the journey. And then this person on the right, with her natural hair, and she is not literally smiling. She is looking like all business. That's what I call Sharonda 3.0. And that's me in this phase of my life, where I am thinking about what it means to really serve, what it really means to give back. All of the things that I've accomplished, I think that they've been really amazing. But at the end of the day, if I'm not doing things for my community, then I don't think that any of them really matter. At this point in my life, I'm probably thinking more about what will people say when I'm no longer here, which I think to some people might sound a little morbid, but for me, it's about a legacy. It's about how am I doing things that are going to make a difference. So that's really where I am. So that's a little bit about me, I would say, just personally. I would say from a professional standpoint, I've been really blessed to be able to do a lot of great things, have a lot of, different roles. I started off in retail, like I said, about 30 years ago. And I've been at Ralph Lauren now for about 24 and a half years. And I started at Ralph Lauren as a general manager in our Jersey Gardens, New Jersey location, which is right across the street from Newark Airport. It is a role that out of every single role that I've actually ever had in my entire career, it is the one that really taught me the most. It is the one that challenged me the most. And it's really the role that I actually learned how to understand people and the needs of people and putting their needs before my own needs. It's really the role that I learned how to be a leader and what it really meant to be a servant leader. So I was a general manager for a few years. Then I became a district manager where I had a lot more responsibility. I was responsible for an entire district that was about 14 stores at the time, doing multi-million dollars across 4 different states. From there, I then actually transitioned and went into human resources. And that for me was a really scary move, because that was probably a role that I never felt like I was qualified for. Everyone else around me felt like I was qualified. And I actually thought that they were a little crazy, because every single other person that worked in human resources at the time had lots of degrees in human resources. And I was only coming with a lot of, good knowledge, a lot of operational experience, but a heart for people. It's probably one of the roles that I learned a lot around how to understand policies and how policies impact people. I also understood a lot about business law. And I spent about 6 or 7 years in human resources, and then I transitioned into operations. So in operations, I was then responsible for some really big projects that our organization was taking on at the time. Most notably RFID. It was one of my major capstone projects where we were bringing RFID to the organization and literally thinking about how we were going to transform our inventory management processes and procedures. So I spent, a significant amount of time in operations. From operations, I then went on to run stores and operations. Did that for a few years, and then I'm in the role that I'm in now, which is running our stores for all of North America, along with being the co-chairperson of our DEI North America team as well.
Wow, that is such a journey for you to start off in college. You were a chemistry major, and then you go into retail, and your journey has been phenomenal. So can you tell us a little bit about your role as the co-chair of DE&I at such a large organization?
Yeah,
and how it has made an impact within the organization itself?
Yeah, so DEI is like, first of all, I would say to some degree, before we even were calling it DE&I, I was doing a lot of this work. It's something that I'm very passionate about. Being treated fairly and equitably in the workplace is really important to me. It's definitely one of my passions. And I think anytime you're dealing with people, you really, to some degree, need to really focus on making sure that people feel like they belong. I think that's been one of the key parts of my leadership that I've really focused on, this whole sense of belonging. What I found is that when people feel like they are a part of something, when they feel like their voice is being heard, when they feel like they're being included, and not just included because it's important to check the box, but when they feel like they're being included, they really tend to give a lot more extra effort. And when people feel like they're not included, they tend not to do those things. So some of the work that I do, we actually have a DEI entire committee, but I'm actually responsible as one of the co-chairs for North America. And there's a lot that we do. We focus on things like education. Education is probably one of the biggest areas that we focus on, because even when you think about simple things, like I thought about some of the 15 headlines that I read this morning, all of them to some degree included some theme of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So if you take, for instance, the Tennessee legislature issue where where the 2 Black men were expelled, but then we don't really hear a lot about Gloria Johnson, who was the 60-year-old white woman that did the same exact things, and she was not expelled. That's a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging issue. When we think about things like the appeals court, that, one of the major headlines that I read this morning was the appeals court keeps abortion pill on the market with restrictions. That's also a DEI issue. And then a few days ago, I know we started this conversation and there was some talk about basketball, but when you even think about something like Angela Reese and how Caitlin Clark, that issue and how they use words like Black people are policed differently, all of those things are DEI issues that we have to be very aware of and very, we have to understand it, because these are all things that are happening in today's, literally they're happening. These were headlines that actually were in the news today. And those are all issues that focus on DEI. And when you have large populations that you're dealing with, you have to be aware of how people might be interpreting them, how people are feeling about them, but more importantly, what are people saying, so that way you can really start to really think about how you actually utilize a lot of these things that are happening as learnings. Some of the other things that I think about when I think about this space and this work, not too long ago, I went to a conference, and, I'm a woman of color. And in the women's conference, one of the things that we talked about was menopause. Now, this was really interesting to me because as a woman, and, menopause is a woman's issue. I did not realize that 20% of the workforce is actually experiencing one or more symptoms of menopause, especially for women that are 50 or older. And it literally started to strike me in such a way that I came back from this conference and I had some conversation with some of the men that actually worked with me. And we started to have this really robust conversation about menopause, because it wasn't something that people talked about. In fact, I got right on the phone and I said to my mother and to my aunts, I was like, wow, like none of you are talking about menopause. Like the most people know about menopause are that people get hot flashes, but that's only one symptom. We're not thinking about the things like brain freeze and some of the other things that are happening. And the fact that 20% of the workforce are experiencing menopause, that's a DEI issue. It's something that we have to be aware of. The fact that 1 in 10 women are actually leaving the workforce because of some of their symptoms, once again, another DEI issue and something that we have to be aware of. But fast forward, I started to have these conversations with some of the men on my team. And it was very interesting to hear their perspectives and for them to share and for them to tell me that, some of the things that we were talking about that their wives were going through or their sisters were going through. And one of their wives actually even sent me flowers because she was just like, I don't know any other place where people are talking about this, and it's, and they're coming home and they're thinking about how they're being better husbands because of some of the information that you're talking about at work. So the reality is that, all of these are things that we have to be aware of. We have to be mindful of, because 20% is a lot of people. That's like 27 million people in the workforce. And then you also think about things like, obviously I spend a lot of time really focusing on issues that deal with women along with some of the other issues. But, just recently on March 14th of this year, we actually, there's this thing called Equal Pay Day, and I'm not sure how many of you have actually heard of it, but essentially March 14th, this date actually symbolizes how far into the year women must work to earn what men actually earned the previous year. So just think about that for a minute. On March 14th, that was the date that women were actually earning what men actually earned last year. So when we think about those things, huge opportunity for us just overall. The fact that white women make, basically 82 cents for each dollar that a white male makes, that's a challenge. And then you start talking about women of color, Black women make right around 63 cents for every dollar. And then Hispanic and Latino women make about 58 cents. So these are all issues that when I think about the work from a DEI perspective, it's really important because those things, regardless to what industry you're in, are impacting you in some type of a way.
Wow, that was like, you really expanded for me, the meaning of DEI, because typically you think of it in terms of race, or you may think of it in terms of salary, but just in terms of a woman, dealing with menopause. I mean, that was, thank you, because I never thought of it in that way, how we have so many DE&I issues that we face daily. And
Yeah.
you also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and I was going to say, and there's so many other things. I think sometimes people try to equate DEI with representation. And I think that is definitely one portion of it. But even something as simple as, I won't even say that it's simple, but during the pandemic, can any of you imagine what it felt like if you were someone that was a part of the deaf or the hard of hearing community, where in many cases, there were no people doing sign language. They're coming outside and basically seeing every single person in a mask. And now you can't even communicate, especially if your major way of communicating was reading lips. Can you imagine what that felt like, especially in the midst of a major pandemic? So those are issues that all focus on D&I. How do we really create a more inclusive environment for people? Disabilities is a huge, huge opportunity. And not just disabilities that people can see. Lots of times there's disabilities that people cannot necessarily see. When I think about things like mental health, sometimes that's a disability and we don't talk enough about it because there's a lot of stigmas. And when I think about people of color, I think about the household that I grew up in, we really did not talk about, mental illness. And it's something that really plagues our communities. And, now I share with people that I have a therapist because I understand my influence and I understand that me sharing those things also encourages other people to say, okay, well, Sharonda can get a therapist. It's okay for me to get a therapist. So I share some of these things because there's just a lot in life that people are dealing with that they can't necessarily figure out. So this mindset of belonging and feeling like you matter and that you're important is even more important, especially in this day and age where, on social media, if you were to look on social media, like everybody's living their best life. And I'm not sure how much of that is true. I'm pretty sure that maybe 85% of the people are, living their best life. Most people are not putting up, all of the challenges that they're having because there's a lot of pressure to feel like you fit in, to feel like you belong in these spaces. So that's another layer of pressure that we also deal with when we think about DEI.
Wow, thank you. I mean, that's just amazing. And you talked about learnings as well. And I'm sure as a Black woman in your industry, within your company, that you face challenges. Can you give us an example of of a challenge that you faced and how you overcame it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that I face challenges every single day. And I think when I think back over my career, there's definitely been a lot of times that I've actually faced, challenges that might have been greater than others. But I would also say that there's also been challenges that I've faced that have been perceived challenges on my end. So let's start with some of the real challenges. Some of the real challenges I would think about are being the only one. That's a real issue and has been a real issue. Majority of the time when I go into spaces, I am the only one. I don't see any people that look like me. Um, and when I say don't really see them, you don't really see a lot of Black women that are heads of stores. Or when I go to conferences, many times I may be the only one. And then you wonder why everybody knows my name. Of course, I'm the only person that looks like me in the room a lot of times. So it's very easy for me, for people to remember my name, but I do try to remember as many people as possible. So I think that, that is a real challenge, this challenge of being the only one. I think that there's also the real challenge of imposter syndrome or some version of, imposter syndrome. I remember, now there's a whole focus on bring your authentic self to work, but I remember, not really always feeling like I could bring my whole self to work. My upbringing was a lot different than a lot of the people that I worked with. While they were over the weekends, I remember we would come in on Mondays and people would talk about horseback riding or, going out to the Hamptons. And, in my mind, I'm like, just not saying anything because I'm just like, okay, well, I just had a cousin that got locked up. I just had a situation where my family members' lights got turned off. So my scenario looked a lot different from theirs. From a personal standpoint. So sometimes you don't always feel like you belong in these spaces because you don't always feel like you have outlets, despite the fact that you might just be just as smart and just as gifted, but sometimes you don't always feel like you fit in. And sometimes it's perceived and sometimes, it's real, but this version of imposter syndrome is really important for us to think about. It's important for us to recognize, and it's also important for us to action. And then I think this whole notion of being held to unfair standards, that's real as well. I started this conversation off by saying, I've always been competitive. I've always wanted to be number one. Like I remember being young and winning a track meet and coming in number 2 and throwing the medal away because I was like, nobody remembers number 2. And that has really stuck with me even in the business world. But the fact is that you feel like you have this weight to save every single person that looks like you. You have this mindset of being excellent because there's not many people that look like you. And you know that people are making decisions based on your performance to hire other people that might look like you. And whether it's real or perceived, it's a weight that we normally carry. So I think that those are things that are real in the workforce. Now, one of the things that I think was something that I had to grapple with. And it's really important that you always constantly surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth and who will check you when, your thinking might be going left. One of those people for me was my dad. And I remember being very early in my career and this was not at my current employer, but being very early in my career, I was a manager. I might've been like maybe 23 or 24 years old, but I was a manager. All of the people that I managed, this was in Short Hills Mall, all of the women that I managed at that time were probably in their 40s or 50s. I was the only Black person in the store, not to mention the fact the only Black leader that they had actually ever experienced. And I was having a very, very difficult time. And I couldn't understand why people would not respond to me, or I just was having a very, very difficult time. I was very early in my career, very headstrong. And I remember coming home one day and saying to my dad, they don't like me because I'm Black and because I'm young. And my dad, who is very Southern in his Southern accent, he said, no, they don't like you because you're bossy and because you're young and you're a young person trying to tell someone that's 40 years old what to do, and you're probably not doing it very nice. So I had to grapple with that. And I had to say, you know what, I have to change my approach. But even in that situation, it was a great learning because sometimes you also had these things in your head that may or may not be true. And once I started to have different conversations and took a different approach with these women who were much older than I was, I mean, they were definitely my dad's age during that time period, I found that we started to connect on a much different level. So I think those things are real. But I think we've also got to really be very aware of where things may be more perceived on our end and how we're perceiving them. as well. And I think the two are equally important.
So basically what I did, if I can, how I interpreted that is to say that, yes, there are challenges, but how I internalize them and how I choose to respond to them, it starts with me. So that's kind of like what I got from that. I know this is a little off. We don't typically do that, but I do this. But I see that, Jess, you have a question, and I just I wanted to pivot just to give you an opportunity, because it could be something, that, pertains to what she's talking about right now.
Oh, thank you. Sorry to interrupt, I guess, but she was moving on from, I guess it was like, you mentioned the political action of the Tennessee representatives, the political action of the Angel Reese basketball situation, which could be, I guess, maybe more media based. But how do you see the evolution of DEI, maybe from a corporate standpoint, considering that DEI is being used right now as a political talking point, even in the media and political base, more as a fear-mongering political talking point, as it pertains to certain political parties? So how do you see DEI possibly being affected by these political actions that are currently happening? Whether it's negative or positive. I'm just curious about that, because it is becoming a very, very polarizing topic by we know who on certain political sides. And that's kind of my question. I hope that's not confusing.
Yeah, what I would say is I think that the media is always going to be the media. They have a role and a responsibility to report news. And sometimes it feels fair and sometimes it does not feel fair. I think the role in DEI, and especially for us that are really practicing any level of DEI, is to really make sure that we are staying true to facts. In the situation with Tennessee, there were 3 people, and two of them were actually expelled and one was not. And she actually is speaking out on behalf of it because it was a little more blatant. Now, there could be a lot of different reasons why that happened and she was not expelled. But I think in the upcoming weeks, we'll probably understand more of that. But I think the big part that I was really just highlighting is when you look at these themes, these are things that are actually happening and they're happening in the world. So we've got to be aware of them, because these are going to be things that people that work with us, that people that work for us, people that we're partnering with, these are the things that are also on their minds. So to think that they're not thinking about those things, they're thinking about them, regardless of whether people are saying them or not. And these things are impacting the ability for people to bring their whole selves to work and really be their authentic selves. So I think that DEI is going to continue to play a really big role, because I think we're going to continue to have these situations. And ideally, what I'm hoping is that people start to get more educated and that our world becomes a lot less polarized than it is right now. I still think we have a long way to go before we get to that place, but I'm hopefully optimistic that we will get there at some point.
Thank you, Jessie, for that question. You're welcome. Well, thank you, Sharonda, for answering that question. So just to, keep it moving a little bit, I want to change the flow of questions a little bit and ask you about your village. To be the person that you are today, you didn't get there and you don't stand there alone. So how important is your support system to you and to your success?
Yeah, I think my support system is very important. And when I think about support in a lot of different ways. I don't think about support just in terms of my village being, Black women. My village has a combination of, a little bit of everyone. It's definitely multicultural. When I think about some of my biggest mentors and some of my biggest advocates and some of the people who have really paved the way for me, in many cases, some of them have actually been white men. When I think about the role that I transitioned into from being a district director to being in human resources, that was the head of stores and operations at the time. that really recognized the fact that I was very talented. And he said, I'm going to create this role for you because right now you're not qualified for it, but we're going to put you in the district director role for exactly 1 year. So that way you get the multi-unit experience, and then you actually are going to be even more qualified to do this role in human resources. So I think it's important that you have a makeup. And I think that makeup needs to look like a lot of different people. Some of the people in my village are professional people that I, work with to solve, issues that some of them might be CEOs, other SVPs and vice presidents. Other people are people in my family. They are a large part of my village because there is nothing like your family members. Like just when, your family members, I don't care what happens, they are not going to allow you to get the big head. They are not going to allow you to really be, they're going to kind of like still put you in check because they remember when, like, so when I think about that little girl in kindergarten, like those are going to be those people that will say, Sharonda, I remember you from Seaman Street. And although sometimes we don't always like to look back, sometimes that's very important because they have a part that's really important. So my village is different people, and it's a lot of different people because life is complex and you need different things at different points in your life. And I think being able to have people that you surround yourself with that are different, I think is important. The other big part that I personally think is important is being very self-aware. So really understanding where your strengths are, where you might have blind spots, and making sure that you surround yourself with people who are not agreeable. Like if there's one thing that I can say, you need some people that drive you absolutely crazy because you know that they are going to disagree with anything that you say, because those people really do help you to develop something totally different. I know it feels very challenging. If you say up, they're going to automatically take the stance of down, but that forces you to rise to the occasion and make your argument a lot stronger. So I've found myself constantly surrounding myself with those people as well, because when I talk about being competitive, knowing that I like to compete, I like to be number one, you don't do that by just having people that are yes people all around you. You need people who are going to have a much different perspective, because those are going to be the people that really challenge you to be your best you.
Wow, that was awesome. And I would do a recap, but I want to get one more question in before we end. How do you manage work-life balance? Because you do a lot. You do a lot. How do you manage that? How do you implement self-care?
Yeah, so I don't really think about work-life balance a whole lot. I think there's been times where my work-life balance has been great, and there's been times where it's been absolutely horrible. My mindset is that you can only give 100%, that's it. And there are times where you have to choose and you have to prioritize and you have to make decisions based on what's going on. And there's certain times where work will take the priority. And then there's certain times where my niece, calls me up and she's like, Aunt Sharonda, are you going to be home for my birthday? And I'm like, ooh, punch in the gut, because I wasn't planning on it. But now, because she's 4 years old, I've got to figure out how to get back on the flight, because me showing up for her birthday or fast forward missing her birthday is going to be something that personally I'm not going to be able to forgive myself with. So you have to create that balance. What I will say is that when I've had people on my team that have been excellent, and when they understand what it means for all of us to be working together, my ability to have more of this balance looks a lot different. So I think your ability to train, develop people, not be afraid to hire people or promote people that are smarter than you and have them on your team, because the reality is that even those people are a great reflection of you. All of those things help you to create more work-life balance. And I schedule it just like I schedule anything else. Just like I have a 12 o'clock meeting, like I go roller skating at least once a week. I go to a swim class at least twice a week, and I schedule it just like I schedule anything else. And that really helps me to make sure that I'm bringing my whole self to work, because, right now I'm on sabbatical. And that was important to me. I have never taken 4 weeks off in my life. And at first I was very afraid of it, but I've gotten very comfortable with it right now, because I've known that there's been some things that I wanted to do for myself to really replenish. And I think the best self-care is you replenishing yourself. So that way, if you're not good for you, you can't be good for anyone else. And I know that it sounds selfish when you just say it out loud, but it is the reality. When I am, at the place where I am crashing and burning, I am no good for anyone, including myself. So I've made a commitment, and I am not breaking any assignments to myself. Just like I would not break a commitment to someone else, I'm not breaking a commitment to myself. I am being very, very mindful of what it means to really make sure that I am doing the things that I need to do, even if it sounds selfish.
Well, this has been awesome, amazing. I've learned so much. Thank you, Sharonda, from the bottom of my heart for coming on. And I know you are so busy. And when I text you, you said, let me check. And I was like, God, please let her be able to make it. And you were. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now I'm going to give time for questions. And then right after that, Sean will come back with housekeeping.
Well, let me jumpstart. Allow everybody to get their questions together. Sharonda, thank you so much again for coming and speaking with us. As you sit back and you shared certain things with us, you talked about your village. How did you keep from having it where those individuals who have known you from when you were that little, Sharonda, again, sitting back and saying, I know you since you said Seaman Street, I think it was. How do they sometimes they pull you back? They keep pulling you, wanting to pull you back. Do you push ignore on your phone? How do you sit back and keep a separation?
Yeah, no, I do not push ignore. I push answer, and I will gladly tell them the person that you knew back then has evolved. So you need to really understand that I am evolving every single day, and I reserve the right to change my mind, to show up differently, to utilize all of the things that I have learned to be a better me. So you might see me tomorrow and I might be different. Just like I change my hair, I can change my mindset, my attitude, and I'm not staying stuck. And I think it's important that you say that to people. And sometimes you have to say it because sometimes it might be implied. And some of the things, obviously we probably all have things that we might be proud of, things that we're not so proud of. But I'm not allowing anybody to push me back into those things that I'm not so proud of. And it's one of the reasons why I've gotten very comfortable with telling my story, because when I tell my story, then I don't have to worry about anybody else telling it for me. But I'm really clear. No, the answer is I'm hitting answer and we're going to have this dialogue and then we're going to keep it moving because that is not the person that I am. And everybody has an opportunity to evolve, change their mind, and, continue to grow. Like as you get additional data points and as you get more information, the goal is that you should be growing and you shouldn't be staying stuck. There's decisions that I made. Had I had more information or different information, I would have made a different decision. But at the time, with the information that I had, that was the decision that I made. And trust me, one thing I'm not doing is constantly looking back because I learned my lesson and I literally keep it moving.
Danielle, thank you so much, Ron. Danielle, do me a favor, that portion, that first clip of what she just said, I need you to send that out to everybody because when we get, people who call us, I just want to push play and play that. And she could be my spokesperson. Okay.
Got it. I got you.
But at the same time, you do need them too, because I think about sometimes in my career where, I started to have all these great things that were happening. And not that I've ever had the big head. Like I've always wanted to be rich. Like when I was young doing my, homework on the porch because our lights might have been off. Like I knew that I wanted to be rich and I knew that education was important. But I always wanted to be rich primarily to help people. And all of the things that I do are to help people. And when there's times where it seems like I am straying away from that, some of the people that have known me forever, they're also the people who also say, Sharonda, remember you said you were going to do this? Or remember you said you were going to help out in this organization. Have you done it yet? So there's also those parts that I actually do appreciate because they keep me very honest and very focused on things that matter. Those are the things that I stop when anything happens I grew up in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and I'm on the board of education. I'm the New Brunswick Education Foundation. I'm on their board of directors. I stopped everything to really work on programs for them because that for me is what my why was. It's the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's the reason why I aspire to be at a high level at an organization, so that way I could actually use my influence and power to make differences in people's lives other than myself. So when I think about how that connects to a lot of the people that I've known before, that's why I keep them around, because they're that constant reminder of, are you doing enough? Have you done enough? What else should you be doing? And what else could you be doing to make a difference in other people's lives?
Hello, yes, my name is Yasla, but I worked in retail for a company last summer, and it seemed that there was no access to corporate leaders in order to like grow within the company, say like if I was interested in marketing. And I was just wondering how you did it and how you were able to gain the attention of people in higher up places within the company.
Yeah, so I think that there's a few things. And I'm sorry that that was your experience, because, you know, I think about me and my role. Not that I know all 8,000 employees, but I know a lot of them. And I'm constantly finding out what people are interested in doing, because I look at our stores organization as a feeder for our corporate roles, because they understand things in a different way, in addition to people who have actually gone to school for certain aspects. I think the first part is being excellent in what you're doing. A lot of times when people are working in retail, they just think about it as retail, and they don't always come and give it their all. And I think in anything that you're doing, I don't care if you're working at McDonald's at the drive-through, you've got to do it with a smile. You've got to be happy. You've got to provide a high level of service and be excellent in what you're doing, because people will notice. So I would probably say that that's number one. I think the other part would be also inquiring about different aspects. Many companies have internship programs. Many companies do job shadowing. I spend a lot of time really helping people to just connecting them, so that way they could actually see what, you know, different aspects are about. I remember I had a lot of interns that were interested in marketing, but then they didn't actually understand that there's a math component of marketing. And they were almost shocked that everything that they were doing in marketing also needed to have some level of an ROI attached to it. So that was probably one of the things that we've actually been able to do that's been very successful. So I would say, if ever you were in that situation again, I think be excellent at the job that you are getting paid to do, but then start inquiring with other people to really say, this might be something that I'm interested in. Who can I actually at least speak with?
Thank you for being here. Thank you for, there's so much that you've said that resonated with me, and I'm going to say it because there's at least 9 or 10 people here who can hold me accountable. Sounds like you're a Jersey girl. We're in the same area, so I will certainly plan to connect with you outside of this. And if you're open to it, I'd love to connect. I wanted to go back to your experience at Short Hills Mall, where your father said, nope, it's not because you're a Black woman, it's because X, Y, and Z. Did you receive that feedback initially, or how did you work through that? Maybe it was a little easier because he's dad, but I'm curious because I can think back to a time where I got a reaction from someone, and initially it was like, say what now? But then as I thought about it, it was the tough feedback that I needed to hear. I'm just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, so you're talking about my 22, 23-year-old self, where I felt like I knew everything more than my dad, more than anybody. And I was just like, Dad, you are absolutely wrong. That's what was saying coming out of my mouth, because there was also this pride thing, like, no, you don't know. You are not in my situation. You don't come to work every single day. I was giving him all of that. But at the end of the day, I had to realize that my dad is telling me things in love. And, you know, we talk about feedback being a gift, and it literally was a gift. But I will tell you, from that feedback, I changed my approach. And one of the things that you also have to be very aware of is not allowing pride to get in the way as well, because it wasn't probably, I changed my approach. My approach, he was absolutely correct, or at least a portion of it was. I needed to do something different with these women who were much older than I was at the time to really understand them and to really get more of their buy-in. The interesting part is that I actually felt so prideful that I actually didn't tell him about some of the success I was having until almost a year later. because for whatever reason, at that time in my life, I did not want him to be right. But that was even a lesson. Like, when people do you a big favor, go back to them and say, you know what, I appreciate that. And at that time, I couldn't actually bring myself to say the words, but eventually I got to that place, and then it started to feel much better. But, you know, I think any tough feedback is hard to hear, and you have the opportunity to either take it or leave it. And I think sometimes you also have to think about who is the person who is giving you the feedback, and do they have your best interests in mind or not? And not all feedback is actual. I mean, it's factual, I would say. So I think you're going to have to decipher and really utilize good judgment. But in this situation, it was factual feedback. And I was happy that I didn't allow my pride to stand in the way, and I was able to action, because it definitely gave me a much greater result. And some of those women, I mean, I went on to watch their children. So we went from this place of, no, I just think that they're racist, to, can you come over and watch my children? And I almost quit my job to just literally watch their children full time. So, I mean, it wound up turning into something that looked a lot more beautiful than what it started out as.
Thank you so much. I have someone that I
guys-
need to go thank for some constructive feedback that they gave me 7 or 8 years ago. So I will do that too. Thank you.
If we could all put our hands together for our guest speaker, Sharonda. Thank you so much for coming out today and just being a blessing. We've learned a lot in so many different areas. And again, just great to know you. If anybody, please, I'm hoping that everybody received the newsletter that we send out. If you have not, please reach out to me. I hope also that everybody received our meeting invite in your calendar. If you have not, please reach out to me. We want to make sure that we continue to encourage people. Right now, our YouTube channel is doing fairly well, where people are going and listening to the meetings after the fact. However, we would love for people to show up to the actual the live meeting as well. So please continue to encourage, post it out there. And if there's anything that we can do to help your efforts as an individual, as well as our efforts collectively, please let me know. Outside of that, guys, thank you so much. It is 1 o'clock, and you guys have a blessed day. Thank you so much.